Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the Curator of Public Programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Fowler Museum's doors reopened to the public on July 1, and we are thrilled to be welcoming visitors back to our galleries. But for now, we are continuing to offer our programs virtually. So thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from, to celebrate the opening of the Map and the Territory, 100 Years of Collecting at UCLA. The Department of Ethnomusicology's World Musical Instrument Collection has a gong circle currently on view at the Fowler as part of the Map and the Territory, a Thai instrument that is capable of making the beautiful music we heard at the top of the program. The UCLA Ethnomusicology Archive is the second largest audiovisual archive of traditional musics in the US, second only to the Library of Congress. Many thanks to ethnomusicology Professor Supina Incy Adler for suggesting this track from the David Morton collection to open our program today. The Map and the Territory distills the vast holdings of UCLA's diverse collections of rare books, works of art, musical instruments, meteorites, bird specimens, and more into a single exhibition. Organized by the Fowler, together with the Hammer Museum, UCLA Library, and other campus partners, this exhibition illuminates connections between people and places, both real and imagined, and celebrates the valuable place collections hold in the history of UCLA's pursuit of knowledge. Today's program will begin with some special welcoming remarks, followed by brief presentations from representations from just a couple of the collections included in this show. A conversation about the collaborative process of shaping the show will follow, and an audience question and answer will wrap things up. Before we get going, 2 quick bits of technical housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click view options at the top of your Zoom screen and select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you'd like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, let's get the show on the road. I'm honored to introduce Cindi Alvitre, Tongva, Director of the Tiat Society and Professor of American Indian Studies at CSU Long Beach, to offer welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Bianca, and Meyaha Athahum, and welcome to Tevangar, our shared motherland, our beautiful Los Angeles, Orange County, and as you know, this is an incredible landscape that has attracted people for many, 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 many years to come together to where we're at today. I want to congratulate the completion and for the opening of Map and the Territory, 100 Years of Collecting at UCLA. I'm honored to open this event on behalf of our Tongva communities, the original people of Los Angeles, Orange counties, and the 4 Southern Channel Islands. As I begin, let me share with you some words from our elders. We, the Tarahatam, indigenous people, the traditional landowners of Tevangar, the Los Angeles Basin, Orange County, Southern Channel Islands, the land, are direct descendants of the beings, Amupavitam, the first people, who formed our lands during a creation time. We have always been here. They prepared the landscape, the world, Tevangar, for the coming of human beings with Naho Enach, that is natural law, natural order, natural knowledge and logic, and Mahach, the generosity, the gift that comes as a result of food being a gift to us, clothing, shelter, medicine, and even archetypes in the landscape. From our Honuk Vitam, the ancestors, we were imbued with the responsibility and obligation, guided by protocol and etiquette, to be part of, take care of, and ensure the welfare of the family, our extended family, defined in its most inclusive expression as humans, animals, plants, spirits, ancestors, and the landscape, the nature, and to pass these teachings and responsibilities on to our children and grandchildren and all who now inhabit this land, this landscape. So we welcome you to Tevangar. This exhibit reflects not only a history of collections held by the Fowler, but also decades of hard work and the building of relationships between our communities and the UCLA Fowler. 30 years ago, and plus that, years ago, we as a tribal people, as tribal communities, did not have access to the collections, many of the things that we're looking at today, and in particular, ancestral remains, the human remains of our ancestors and their treasures. Our ancestors at some point in time were considered to be scientific property, which is unfortunate, but it seems so removed from what we're experiencing here today as a result of these genuine collaborations that we have built now with the Fowler Museum. And genuine collaborations take hard work. So today, access means not only be able to fulfill our obligations to take care of those ancestors and all of their things, their treasures that they brought with them when they put them into the ground with their ceremony, but also the hundreds and thousands of other objects, artwork, as we may refer to it today, that continues to be housed by the Fowler. The difference is today we have a confidence. We have a cultural confidence that has been rebuilt as a result of these very, very, very long-standing relationships. And believe me, it was a lot of hard work to get to this place. Even at the end, and ironically, at the end of us all being confined, I think we come out with renewed looks at and perspectives of who we are and what our relationships are. So today is in fact a celebration, not only of the reopening of the Fowler, but also to be able to say with confidence that our relationship between the tribes and the Fowler is one that reflects a genuine collaboration. This cultural confidence has been renewed. And what I mean by that is, you know, and I will say this, that in 2016, as a result of that collaboration, over 2,100 ancestors were repatriated and reburied. That's significant. That's really significant. And the beauty of this exhibition today is that two of our very prominent artists, River Garza and Mercedes Dorme, will be exhibiting their work, which really speaks to where we're moving in the future as tribal people. And it is being able to have our younger generations and people within our communities to retell this history and to be able to present their own mapping, their own cultural mapping within the setting of an exhibition space such as the Fowler Museum. So we want to once again welcome all of you. It is a time for celebration, and I look forward to seeing and hearing from everybody today. So once again, meiha and welcome to Vanguard. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindi, for honoring us with that beautiful welcome. Now I would like to invite Juliesina, Associate Vice Chancellor of Alumni Affairs and CFO of the UCLA Foundation and UCLA Investment Company, to join us for your welcoming remarks.
Thank you so much, Bianca. It's really a joy and an honor to share this space with everyone today. Lighting the way, that was the theme of UCLA's Centennial celebration, and indeed the path that UCLA has paved. I am so honored to represent the UCLA Centennial Committee, led by the phenomenal Carole Goldberg. The Centennial Committee led our nearly 2-year and beyond celebration and consisted of faculty, staff, students, and our alumni, with a solid goal of celebrating UCLA's very young path of 100 years and illuminating our opportunities for the future. The depth and the breadth of our Bruin community in Westwood, in Los Angeles, California, around the country, and Chancellor Block led our Centennial celebrations around the world, lifting up our past, our present, and our future. Very early in our planning, the committee was intentional in encouraging and creating opportunities for campus collaboration in building our Centennial narrative. A call for proposals gathered approximately 150 proposals, and 4 were chosen. Today, we gather to celebrate one of our 4 UCLA Centennial initiatives selected by this campus committee. We acknowledge the inspirational leadership of the Fowler and our amazing campus partners, the Hammer Museum, our UCLA Library, and many others. Together, let us light the way, because this is what Bruins do. 100 years of history to celebrate, and many 100 years more yet to be made. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Now, last but not least, I would like to invite Marla C. Burns, Shirley and Ralph Shapiro Director of the Fowler Museum, to take the stage.
Hello and welcome. I am very honored to say that this is my last official act as the Shirley and Ralph Shapiro Director of the Fowler Museum, and that the exhibition we celebrate today has opened to the public just in the nick of time. It is one that I'm very proud to have been a part of, and I want to thank Juliesina, who you've just heard from, and Carole Goldberg, the chair of the Centennial Celebration Steering Committee, for the major funding they provided to develop and produce the map and the territory, along with the support of many donors to the Fowler's UCLA Spark crowdfunding campaign. We were all very disappointed that the exhibition couldn't serve as a centerpiece of UCLA's anniversary programs when it was set to open in April of 2020, but we are thrilled that now, 15 months later, it highlights nearly 200 objects representing the campus's remarkable material resources, making visible what is often the invisible work of the university. I also wish to warmly thank Cindi Alvitre for her very special welcoming words and for being such an incredible friend to the Fowler. We have worked together on many projects over the years, and Cindy's engagement as a Tongva leader and educator has helped us respect and value the indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands we occupy and the rich material culture that expresses their history and traditions. We are honored that the map and the territory begins with an installation by artist Mercedes Dorame, a member of the Gabrielino Tongva tribe, and ends with a second installation by Tongva artist River Garza. When we learned about the upcoming 2020 UCLA Centennial and the campus desire to support collaborative initiatives to appropriately mark this major milestone, it seemed opportune for the Fowler Museum to consider a kind of sequel to a very successful cross-campus partnership we forged earlier in the 2000s that resulted in the 2005 exhibition, UCLA Collects, Bodies of Knowledge. It drew on works from 5 campus collections, all also represented in our current effort, and its goal was to underscore the critical role of university collections in the pursuit of knowledge. It also was a response to a multi-year, multi-campus research effort called Microcosms, A University Collects, which began in the late 1990s and had the ambitious goal of inventorying all of the discrete collections on what were then the 9 campuses of the UC system. While this project was never fully completed, we did learn that the totality of things held across the system probably rivals the scope of holdings of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The collections at UCLA alone are immense and varied, and in and of themselves likely exceed 21 million items. And so it was fitting for the Fowler to propose a more comprehensive effort in the context of UCLA's centenary by bringing together objects from 13 collections and by initiating a collaborative curatorial process to do so, which the conversation following will discuss in some detail. By bringing disparate works together in unexpected ways, we seek to offer an alternative system of knowledge, one whose value derives from visual and intellectual associations between objects and not just information about them, and one that relinquishes the rigidity of disciplinary models. Our project also rests on the belief that things are not just things, but are dynamic living resources, subject to multiple viewpoints and voices, evaluation and reevaluation, consideration and reconsideration by artists, curators, students, and communities. The fresh juxtaposition of items in the map and the territory offers visitors opportunities to reflect on the new meanings and connections the objects that have been chosen suggest. I warmly invite all of you to visit the Fowler Museum now that we have reopened, and to see this exhibition and to take advantage as well of the other digital programs that are upcoming that Bianca has organized to even more fully interpret this exhibition. I would also like to offer my deep thanks on behalf of the Fowler Museum to our primary partners on this effort, the Hammer Museum and the UCLA Library, and also to all of the curators, custodians, and other staff of the 13 collections that are represented in the map and the territory. And despite the many, many challenges of the past year, the collective commitment this kind of project represents has brought this ambitious effort to fruition. And I want to list those collections for you so you know the range of things that we have on campus. First, of course, the Fowler Museum at UCLA, the Archaeology Collection at the Fowler Museum at UCLA, the UCLA Hammer Museum, the UCLA Grunwald Center for the Graphic Arts, UCLA Library Special Collections, UCLA Library Film and Television Archive, the William Andrews Clark Memorial Library, the UCLA Meteorite Collection, the UCLA Benjamin Gladys Thomas Air Photo Archive, the UCLA Rock Art Archive, the UCLA Donald R. Dickey Collection of Birds and Mammals, the UCLA World Musical Instrument Collection, and the UCLA Ethnomusicology Archive. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce the participants in the presentations and conversation to follow. I'd like to begin with Matthew H. Robb, the Fowler's Chief Curator, who is also the moderator of this discussion, Heather Briston, the University Archivist and Head of Curators and Collections at the UCLA Library, Rebecca Fenning Marschall, Manuscripts and Archives Librarian at the William Andrews Clark Memorial Library, and Juliet Hook, the Meteorite Manager at the UCLA Meteorite Collection. Welcome to all of you. Have a great conversation that we're all looking forward to. And as Bianca said, see you at the other end. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Marla, and thank you, Julie, and thank you, Cindi, for setting the stage for today's conversation and presentations. I just want to reiterate my thanks to all three of our introducers for their information as they're conveying exactly where we are and where we've been. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about the installations that we worked on, we were fortunate to work with Mercedes Dorame and River Garza. We're having a program about that on July 17th. And again, just want to recognize the work of Carole Goldberg and Wendy Teeter, the Curator of Archaeology at the Fowler, for strengthening and continuing those conversations and relationships that Marla and Cindi were speaking about, and how lucky we are to continue those, to make the land acknowledgement the beginning of a conversation, the first step in a conversation rather than the end of one. It's my great pleasure to share the stage today with Heather and Juliet and Rebecca. And you know, we had the chance to walk through the show a week or so ago, and it really was astonishing how that ebullience of being able to be in the same space with people and objects and these kinds of conversations that Marla was talking about as well, the collaborations that we've been working on for so long, to see them to come to fruition. And I think that it's really a wonderful opportunity to welcome people back to campus, staff, faculty, students, researchers, curators, and as well as members of the broader LA community. This is a great way to reacquaint yourself with UCLA and the richness of the collections that it holds. Some of which are on view for the public on a regular basis, some of which are not. And that was one of the things that we wanted to showcase as we were planning this exhibition, with many, but not all, of the collections that are on campus. Even the 13, that's still not everything on campus. So we're gonna have to do this again in a few years. The good news is, as you'll learn from today's speakers, we did leave some things on the cutting room floor. So you're going to see today a little bit about the history of these different collections, 3 of the collections included, as well as some of the objects that they might have wanted us to include, and so I have tinges of regret of being like, oh man, yeah, we should have tried to do that. But we'll do another one of these collaborative shows in the next few years, and we'll come back to some of these ideas and objects that we explored here. And so with that, I will hand the baton to Heather.
Thank you for that introduction, Matthew. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and that way we will get to see some of the ones that didn't quite make it. So I'm here representing the UCLA Library, and as you heard in my title, I'm also the university archivist. So I couldn't resist. I had to add something from the university archives. That this happens to be a construction photograph from 1927 of Powell Library and Royce Hall. This image actually represents our oral history collections. We had identified some possible items, but unfortunately they did not make it into this version. But I encourage everybody to check out our digital library, where you can get lots of these items there. This is a handmade Korean flag from the Ho-Young Ham papers. Those are the papers of a Korean immigrant family in Hawaii in the early 1900s. It's a marvelous collection that includes papers, artifacts, and materials from everyday life. This is a collection that Special Collection shares with the East Asian Library. This represents our collections of the history of science and medicine. This is a piece that was created by the artist Mary H. Lesser, who was an artist embedded with the School of Medicine class of 1971 incoming medical students. And she worked alongside those students as a participant observer, creating sketches, color prints, and etchings. And then finally, this is actually something that you will see, but in the second part of the exhibit, which will open in the fall. But I had to include it because it's one of my favorites. This is a page from our interface messenger processor logs, which are in the Leonard Kleinrock papers. And this page actually documents the first message that was sent on the ARPANET, which became the internet, from October 29th, 1969. And one of my favorite things about it is that you can't document the history of the internet without paper. And now I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Rebecca Fenning Marschall at the Clark Library.
All right, thank you, Heather. I thought that I would start today just by giving you a little bit of an overview about the Clark Library itself. Since if you're not familiar with the library, it's not quite so obvious as the UCLA Library as a whole. So the Clark Library is a special collections unit that doesn't report through the main library, but is part of the Interdisciplinary Center for 17th and 18th Century Studies in the College of Humanities. We're located 12 miles from the UCLA campus in the West Adams neighborhood of LA. And we have been a part of UCLA since 1934. We're housed in this 1926 Beaux-Arts building, which you can see here. And our collecting areas still reflect the central collecting goals of our founder, William Andrews Clark, Jr. And those areas are 17th and 18th century, mostly British, history, literature, and culture, Oscar Wilde and the fin de siècle, modern fine press printing and the book arts, and the history of Montana and the West. And this is a picture of one of the rooms on our historic ground floor. Participating in this exhibition gave us the opportunity to think a bit differently about our collections, as we're primarily a paper-based and book format research collection without an active exhibition program of our own. It took a while to learn to think flexibly about our collection materials and the best way we could collaborate on many of the exhibition's themes, while still trying to reflect the true scope of what the Clark contains. Now, not all of our collection areas actually ended up being represented in the final exhibit. In fact, nearly all the Clark materials you'll see when you visit the Fowler are from the 17th and 18th centuries. So I thought I'd highlight a few of the items that didn't make the cut, just as a way to show more about what the Clark contains and the full scope of our collections. So I'm going to start with one of my favorites, which is this selection of different covers for various editions of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which fit with an early exhibit theme idea of multiples that was cut from the final show. We have one of the largest collections of Wilde manuscripts in the world, and we also actively collect his work in as many modern editions and languages as possible. And these are just 3 of the Dorian covers I showed to exhibit collaborators as possibilities. I probably shot 25 of them total, and we have hundreds more in our stacks. Another exhibition theme that was actually very easy for us to think of materials for was beyond. There were a lot of things that we could not use related to this theme. So these are just a few of those items that didn't get selected from our large collection of 17th and 18th century books, manuscripts, and ephemera related to death and to the occult. The items here include a printed funeral ticket, which had blanks that have been filled out by hand with the particulars about the departed and the funeral event, a title page from a book on sinful life and deathbed repentance, which sounds much more exciting than the title page itself actually is, and a page of ink drawings from a manuscript on witchcraft, showing illustrations of various demons and witches' familiars. Another example that didn't even make the cut for this slide, but was still really fun, is a 1920s book called Ghost Epigrams of Oscar Wilde as Taken Down Through Automatic Writing, which is one of our many Oscar Wilde psychic related holdings. And that again also sounds very exciting, but it's not an illustrated book. And title pages in an exhibit case are not really, they don't make for a great exhibition. So that's not something you'll see at the Fowler. Lastly, I wanted to show these 2 books, which are both about Euclid's Principles of Geometry. One is a recent artist book by Russell Merritt from 2017, and the other is the 1570 English edition with an introduction by John Dee. And these are actually a pairing of books that we've shown many times at the library for in-class visits and other programs. So if you've visited the Clark, you may have seen these in person before. But these are items that we really, really love, not just because they're so interesting on their own, but because of the connection between them. And this connection between modern book arts and the early modern and 19th century works that we collect is actually an important part of our collecting philosophy, trying to find these relations between our sometimes very disparate seeming collection areas. So hopefully these and the items that you'll actually see in the exhibit, if you visit the Fowler, will give you a bit of a sense of what the Clark Library is and what it contains. And now I'm going to pass off to Juliet from the Meteorite Gallery.
So what you're looking at here are a variety of different kinds of meteorites that we have in our collection at UCLA. And in the bottom corner, we have a couple different photographs of our Meteorite Gallery located in the Geology Building. And for those of you that are not familiar, meteorites are rocks that have been injected as meter-sized objects into the Earth's orbit following collisions on their parent bodies. And these parent bodies include asteroids, the moon, and even Mars. And meteorites are of great scientific importance because some have preserved the record of processes that occurred before and during the formation of the planets, which allow us to study the origin of our solar system. So yes, our objects in the map and the territory are actually the oldest. They are in the beyond section. Some of our meteorites are 4.65 billion years old. And what you're looking at here is an iron meteorite called Canyon Diablo. And the same meteorite is in both photos. The picture on the left is from our gallery opening in 2014, and on the right is obviously from a publication in 1923. And this particulate fragment derived from a 300,000 ton projectile that formed a meteor crater in Arizona about 50,000 years ago. And what's interesting is this particular meteorite came to UCLA in 1934, along with the Clark Library by the son of the copper baron, William A. Clark. And what you can see in the publication on the right-hand side, there's a little girl and there are 3 meteorites next to her feet. And some of those meteorites are also Canyon Diablo meteorites that are displayed in the map and the territory. What we have here on this slide are Martian and lunar meteorites. We have them both in our collection and on display in our Meteorite Gallery. But in the map and the territory, we have this meteorite in the top hand corner from Mars called Los Angeles. So our curator, Dr. Alan Rubin, has very close relationships with meteorite collectors and hunters. And one brought 2 stones that he found very interesting. And our curator looked at them underneath the microscope and determined that this was in fact a Martian meteorite. And he didn't have just one, he had 2. And meteorites are named after the location in which they were found. And so this, he couldn't quite remember where he found it. So it ended up being named Los Angeles because it was classified at UCLA. What you're looking at here is a beautiful oriented meteorite that has not been classified yet. And a meteorite develops orientation when it experiences a period stable of flight through Earth's atmosphere, like you can see in this artist's rendering. So instead of tumbling back and forth, this particular meteorite fell with a straight trajectory. And so the resulting meteorite can show evidence of flow lines, which is this beautiful texture you can see, which occur when air pressure melts the surface facing Earth and pushes the droplets backwards. So this is a result of the passage of the meteorite through the Earth's atmosphere, and this would have been a great entry in Borders and Boundaries. If you look at the mirror on the left and the right-hand side of the meteorite, you can see how it's completely smooth because that was not the side facing Earth as it fell down into the Earth's surface. And lastly, we have the Old Woman meteorite. The Old Woman meteorite is the 2nd largest meteorite found in the US, and upon its finding, weighed about 6,070 pounds. We have a slab on the right-hand side on display in our gallery, which is about 177 pounds, and is named the Old Woman meteorite because it was found in the Old Woman Mountains of San Bernardino County in California in 1975. What's interesting is that it was found on public lands. And so these prospectors couldn't sell the meteorite. Instead, it belonged to the Bureau of Land Management, who wanted it to be stewarded at the Smithsonian. Our late curator, Dr. John Wasson, instead got together with other Los Angeles and San Bernardino scientists and curators and wrote to Congress asking that this particular California meteorite actually be on in the state in which it was found on display, which of course happened. As you can tell, we have it on our display here. So it just brings up an interesting point about collecting and the origin stories of some of our specimens.
Well, thank you, Juliet and Rebecca and Heather for those illuminating presentations. I really, it is this funny thing of just sort of like revisiting as we're going back into the building, revisiting our offices and revisiting the projects that we left behind in March of 2020. And now y'all have taken me back to some of those early meetings that we had, trying to figure out exactly what we were going to do with all of these different collections that were around the table. I remember some of those meetings that we had where that was a really exciting thing about collaborating with everyone, that in many cases, it was the first time, that was the first time certainly several of us knew that there was a meteorite collection. Certainly the first time a lot of us knew about the Dickey, bird and mammal collection. And the energy in some of those conversations, I remember thinking, oh man, we got to figure out a way to get that conical meteorite in there. That's such a great way of sort of talking about the influence of kind of natural forces in thinking about design. That was one of those themes as we were working on developing the themes for the show, that was sort of like, that was a good one. We're going to have to go back to that one. And so I if for those of you who are watching and listening and learning from these presentations, if you liked what everybody presented today, come to the Fowler and see what's actually in the show, because that was some pretty good stuff that we saw there. And so there's even more of that in the exhibition, and of course there's even more in the collections themselves. And that's one of the things that we wanted to showcase, particularly for collections like the Clark and the Meteorite Gallery that don't necessarily have the same profile, public profile as a place like the library, which is pretty pretty well understood as integral to the functioning of the university. And there's also this amazing slice of history in terms of how these collections came to UCLA, shaped UCLA, give it the status of the world-class research institution that it has as it's developed over time. The library has obviously been part of the university since the very beginning, but institutions like the Clark and the Fowler and the Meteorite Gallery, they come later as a way of showing how important these kinds of collections and important this kind of research based on objects, based on books, based on things is to the life of the university. So those are just some of the thoughts that come out of my brain when we're having these roundtables again. And with that, just open up the floor to the three of y'all to perhaps talk a little bit more about your public accessibility, if you want to mention that, each of you, and then we can talk a little bit more about how y'all remember the process of planning the exhibition. So Juliet, you want to tell us how people can get to the Meteorite Gallery?
Yes, we are located in the Geology Building on the 3rd floor, room 3697, but we have a very active website. So if you go to meteorites.ucla.edu, that's where you can find us. And we are currently not open, but we will open at some point, hopefully soon in the fall. So stay tuned to our website where we will announce that.
Heather, how about the library?
Well, the library is open to everyone, at least virtually right now. As with the Meteorite Library, we are currently only open for campus research, but our mission is open to everyone, the general public, anyone who wants to come in. And so one of the things that I think is wonderful is to go to our website right now, because it will tell you about what services we do have available. We've been working very hard on developing resources and digital resources and virtual services to serve a wide swath of research needs and satisfying curiosity. So I would again also encourage people to check our website. It's library.ucla.edu to learn more about what we have now and to help find us when it is time to come here. Because I think one of the things too is that where this exhibit starts, there's a lot more where that comes from.
That's right. And, and I remember, Rebecca, when folks from the Clark were coming over and, just talking about some of the amazing treasures and, the Oscar Wilde wall of pictures of Dorian Gray covers is still very much in my mind, and a thing that hopefully we'll be able to do someday in the future. But tell us a little bit more about how folks can find the Clark.
Oh, sure. I just have to say, though, the Dorian Gray wall still is haunting my dreams as well. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. The Clark is much in the same boat as the Meteorite Collection and most of the UCLA Library. So we're currently not open. So people can continue to check our website and our various social media outlets to find out more about when we will be reopening, which hopefully will be in the relative near future. But when we are open, like the rest of the library, we're open to anyone regardless of affiliation or degree level. Anyone who has an interest in using our collections can come in and see whatever they would like. We also, as I said, are in a historic building. So in the pre-pandemic world, we offered multiple weekly tours of the historic portions of the library. And that probably will restart at a much later date, but one day we'll start doing that again too.
Right. We're not out of the woods yet, but it is a wonderful opportunity to return to campus and see some of these treasures, and to just help folks out. who haven't seen the show or haven't had a chance to learn more about it, a little bit of that history in terms of how we built the themes. We ended up selecting three themes. Home, or the first one is sort of borders and boundaries. And so in that section of the exhibition, there are a lot of different kinds of maps. That's where Mercedes Dorme's installation sort of opens the show with a kind of a personal map based on archaeological objects, but a wonderful selection of objects from both the Clark and the library, and as well as the Fowler and the Hammer, examples of contemporary art, alongside these kinds of older objects and sculptures. Home and the built environment. So we were able to select from the library's rich array of architectural models. And there's also a wonderful set of architectural drawings, including the front profile of the Clark. As well, again, as a number of other objects, exploring that kind of theme about what does it take to make a building, and the kinds of imaginary buildings, that unbuilt buildings that are also documented in UCLA's collections. And then that beyond section, that was the real sort of brain twister for a lot of us as we were trying to figure out, that was definitely one of the questions I was always thinking of from a curatorial perspective, was like, how do we get the meteorites in here? How do we get meteorites to talk with other objects? And I think we did a pretty good job. But again, it was thanks to the curiosity, ingenuity, and imagination, of Juliet and the team at the Meteorite Gallery, and Heather and her team at the library, and Rebecca and the team at the Clark, that we'd come back and forth with these different kinds of like, well, what have you got that would fit this theme? And trying to work through these different possibilities and different ideas. And I'd be interested to know from any of y'all what y'all remember from some of those attempts, and sort of like how crazy did some of these requests seem?
Well, I had the advantage of being as part of the project from the very beginning. So I remember, at one point we had 9 themes. So as I like to tell people, it's like, we got so many exhibits that we can do now because we've worked through all of those themes, and it was so hard. But I think especially that point where we were trying to make sure, like, well, what do you have? From my perspective, it was great because it asked us as the library and as special collections to think creatively about our collections. And so that meant, I went back to my colleagues, and I went back to, in some cases, people who've worked with our collections for decades, to say, like, what do we have? Talk to me about things that could fit in this place. And that was actually kind of fun, because I think in many ways we were able to bring out materials that we wouldn't normally bring out, because I think I can resonate a lot with what Rebecca said about how, in some ways, this need to think visually was in many ways different from how we approach a lot of the pedagogical use of our materials, which are still very textually based, even so that finding those other items, sometimes I was just like, I have no idea. But you know what? My colleagues never let me down. They always were like, well, what about these 14 things that I would then take photographs of and bring to future discussions? So my colleagues never let me down.
Yeah, no, and it was great to have those kinds of conversations and energy with everybody. Juliet, Rebecca, any other comments in that vein?
Well, Heather brought up a great point where for the Meteorite collection, it was interesting to try and pair the themes. How were we pairing the themes? Were we pairing it via science, or was it aesthetically what you were looking at? And so it's interesting to understand, what were the labels going to say? Like, how are you going to be able to display this information? So I just think it's a beautiful pairing of science and art together.
I wanted to follow up on something else that Heather said. Just about that the exhibit gave us a chance to use those materials that we don't necessarily use in that same pedagogical context all the time. So we usually do a lot of exhibits, or displays at the Clark for class visits, and it's usually title pages of things, and we talk about the books. But we have a relatively large collection of artwork and other sort of three-dimensional artifacts, and those don't get a lot of use. They sort of seem like window dressing, even though they're not. They're still collection materials. So it was really exciting that in this exhibit, people will see we have the terrestrial globe that is in the exhibit, that's from the 1600s, that doesn't get a lot of attention. We don't talk about it that often. And then there's also a ship model that's a model of Halley's ship. And that usually just lives tucked in someone's office in the library. So it was a great opportunity to celebrate these collection items that just don't get to see the light of day and don't get talked about that often.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are some great points, and the things like the boat model from Halley's expeditions is a really wonderful pairing with this incredible 17th, 18th century silver boat that is part of the Fowler's collection. And so to sort of bring those kinds of objects together, you get into these kinds of sort of obsession of boat model makers and wondering exactly what's going on in the backs of people's minds with those sorts of things. And yeah, it really was just that kind of like there was some fun, there was some playfulness in terms of the kinds of things that we were trying to get across, the creativity that lies behind a lot of these collections. We've got a couple of some questions that are coming in from our members of the public. One from a colleague that we know, Nina Schneider from the Clark Library, wondering if we're planning on an accompanying catalog. And I think it's safe to say that would be another effort of multiple years to try to accomplish that task. We certainly weren't able to do it for this one, but I do think that it's worth exploring and worth considering now that we've gotten everybody together in a couple of different ways, a few different times, to keep those conversations among the different collections on campus going, so that we can share some of those, share some of the challenges that we have taking care of the collections that we have. Storage space is always, it's a very mundane problem, but it's always a challenge. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the library is probably not going to stop acquiring any books anytime soon. And so I think it's a great opportunity for those of us who are invested in these collections on campus to be able to continue to collaborate and come together. And maybe there'll be a book in the future. How about that? Another question about essentially the inclusion of our Tongva artists, Mercedes and River. What about the objects that they included? And for that, my best recommendation for Robert, who's asking that question, is to come to the program with Mercedes and River on the 17th, so a week from tomorrow. I'll be there, as well as Wendy Teeter, the curator of archaeology, and we'll talk a lot more about the selections that they made from the archaeology collections, some of the ideas that they were working with themselves as artists, and then the other ways that we thought that they really worked well with the themes of the exhibition as a kind of an opening statement and as a closing statement. And then, so a couple of questions about favorite materials and and other kinds of unique juxtapositions and pairings from the show. And I have a lot, so I'm gonna step back a little bit and see if any of the three of y'all want to offer up any of the sort of the things that you like the best when you were able to see the show in person.
Well, I'll start with that one because I have more than one, but I have to say one of the coolest things that I just loved is that we have the meteorites with the two different versions of the opening monologue of the original Star Trek television program, all handwritten and hand typed and annotated. And so, to sort of have space, the final frontier, and actual meteorites in conversation, I think is really cool.
Rebecca, how about you?
I was also going to say that the meteorites are one of my favorite pairings of the show, because they come from the Clark. At the library, there used to be an observatory, which maybe you could see in one of Juliet's slides, but there used to be an observatory that stands right next to where our building is now, and the meteorites lived there. And then at a certain point when they decided it didn't make sense for the observatory to be there or for the meteorite collection to be housed in it, they sent them to campus. And so when the Meteorite Gallery was launched, I supplied them with some copies of the observatory tickets. But anyway, being able to see the Clark and the Meteorite Gallery in dialogue in the same space was really great, because we've tried to borrow the Canyon Diablo meteorite before, and it would take a forklift and it's way too difficult to get to the Clark. So at least they can be together at the Fowler.
Juliet, how about you?
There's one piece that I absolutely loved in the map and territory, and forgive me because I cannot remember the artist, but it's a starry photograph that I just thought was beautiful, like in connection with the Beyond section and everything. I just thought it was stunning.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we were trying to go for, that in each of the 3 sections of the exhibition, there are real maps of real places, and there are imaginary maps of imaginary places, and then there are these things that are sort of in between. So when artists sort of take that scientific data and they turn it into something else, that's another form of knowledge production, and certainly artists like Mercedes and River, along with many others that the Fowlers worked with, they use that kind of archival material and that kind of data, as part of their creative engine. And so, it's great to be able to, as y'all are saying, sort of bring these things together, so that you can derive that kind of inspiration and energy from them too. I think for me, sort of similar to the creativity that the Meteorite Collection brought to the table was also from the Dickey Bird and Mammal Collection, because pretty early on we started talking about migration as kind of one of these sub themes, and it was actually Blair Van Valkenburg from the Dickey who said, well, we've got the Arctic tern, the bird that migrates the farthest across the planet, back and forth from the North to the South Pole. And so, yes, that was, that sort of broadened our horizons to sort of think about migrations in not just human ways, but in other ways around the world. And I think for me, one of the things that I was really excited about, and it does go back to working with Mercedes and River, was that I really wanted to know, working with Heather, like, what was the oldest image of campus on campus? Like, what was the oldest thing? What was the oldest drawing? And it turns out that it's probably one of the sketches from the diseños, these land grant documents that are kept in. There are a couple of different copies, one here, one at the Bancroft, and the Rancho de San Jose de Buenos Aires, that is the land grant from the Mexican government that eventually turns into the Wolfskill Ranch, that eventually turns into Westwood and the UCLA campus. It was for me, it was a really important way to sort of try to connect some of these histories across the campus and across the collections. And we actually went over to special collections, and Heather pulled out a lot of those materials for us to see with River and Mercedes. And again, just that one map is really exciting and interesting, but there are so many other maps of so many other different parts of Southern California in that book that are worthy of their own analysis. So I think that's one of my pairings, I would say. But yeah, I do kind of love the Star Trek memos too.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Thanks to everyone who participated in our celebration today: Matthew, Heather, Rebecca, Juliet, Marla, Cindy, and Julie. We really appreciate you guys all being here today. And if you're local, we hope that you'll come to the Fowler soon to check out the exhibition for yourself, in person, in real time, in a real space. It's been way too long since we've welcomed you at the Fowler, and we miss you. This program has been recorded and it will be available immediately on the Fowler Museum Facebook and on the next few days on our Instagram and on our website for you to revisit and share. And we hope that you'll join us for our next program, which is tomorrow at 11 a.m., celebrating the opening of another excellent exhibition currently on view at the Fowler, Photo Cameroon, Studio Portraiture 1970s to 1990s. Details for that program can be found on the closing slide. In the meantime, we hope that you all have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Thank you again, everyone. Bye.